The name of this story is The Cry of the Cats. It all started about 75 years ago when old Hattie Johnson was killed on the front porch of her beloved house by rowdy kids out for a night of fun. Fun that turned into terror. Hattie's husband, George, had built that house for her as a wedding present. The strong old house represented everything that had ever mattered to Hattie. And even when her husband died and she became too old to care for the house alone, she couldn't bear to leave it. The town folks were disgusted by the old house. They complained about the towering weeds, the chipped paint, and the stench that came from the overflowing trash bins out in front. But mostly, they complained about Hattie's 13 screeching and howling cats. "I haven't slept in weeks," Mrs. Smith declared at one town meeting. "Someone ought to have that crazy lady and her cats put away." Everyone in the town agreed. The mayor tried to convince Hattie to move to a rest home in the next town over, but Hattie wouldn't budge. "The only way I'll ever leave my house," she told the council, "is in a wooden box." The kids started spreading stories about Hattie. "I heard she's really a witch who skins kids alive and lets her cats nibble their bones," a boy in the schoolyard would say. Every night, some of the kids would throw rocks at her windows. Although the neighbors heard everything, they never did anything to stop the viciousness. Some say they encouraged it, hoping to drive Batty Hattie out of the town once and for all. Finally, one night they did. And as Hattie had said, it was in a wooden box. It seems that when Hattie came out on the porch to catch the troublemakers, the boys threw a rock which hit Hattie in the head. She fell to the ground in a heap. The townspeople buried Hattie under the elm tree in her yard alongside her husband. They left the grave unmarked so the house would be easier to sell. The cats, left to fend for themselves, wandered around town searching for food, clanging the lids of trash bins and knocking over everything in their paths. And every night, they would return to Hattie's house where they screeched and howled all night long. Finally, the mayor decided to have them all put to sleep. Rounding them up was a difficult task, but 3 weeks later, the very last cat had been disposed of. In the next few years, a couple of families moved into Hattie's place, but neither stayed very long. It was said that Hattie's spirit wouldn't allow anyone but Hattie to live there. Finally, the town council had the place boarded up, and it stayed that way until the Murphys moved in. Mrs. Quate, the real estate agent, told the Murphys that with a little work, this great bargain of a house could become a real beauty. She warned them about the old plumbing, the bad wiring, and the leaking roof, but she decided not to warn them about the stories about Hattie's spirit. Jack and Sheila Murphy loved their new home. They worked hard to fix it up for themselves and their 2 children, Jennifer and Zach. Jack replaced the shattered windows with shiny new ones, and Sheila gave the wood a fresh coat of white paint. Jennifer was the first one to hear the scratching. It started late one night after everyone was in bed. At first, it was only a slight noise, but then it got louder and louder until terrified little Jennifer ran crying into her parents' bedroom. "Relax, honey," Sheila said soothingly. "It's only that old elm tree scratching against your window." The next night, the scratching was louder, and it was joined with a tap, 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 tap. This time it was Zach who came running into his parents' room in tears. It was tough getting the kids to go to bed that next night. Even Sheila and Jack were a little on edge as they crawled into their large 4-poster bed. Where could these noises be coming from, they wondered to themselves. At around 2 in the morning, the Murphys heard whoosh, whoosh, tap, 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 scratch, scratch. And 10 seconds. The entire family was huddled together on Jack and Sheila's four-poster bed, and they stayed that way until Sheila went down to start breakfast the next morning. As Sheila was pouring 4 glasses of orange juice, she heard a soft purring coming from outside the kitchen door. She opened the door and found a tiny black kitten with a white star on its forehead. "Oh, you poor angel," she cried as she picked up the kitten. As soon as Jennifer and Zach saw the kitten, they fell in love with it. "I want to name her Hattie," said Jennifer. "Hattie the cat." At school that day, Jennifer bragged about Hattie the cat to her classmates. The other kids were jealous, but not for long. The following morning, Lisa Smith was late because her mother had found a tiny gray kitten on their kitchen doorstep. And that same morning, Danny Potter's mother had found a white kitten on their doorstep too. And the morning after that, 6 more mothers found 6 more tiny kittens on their doorsteps. By the end of the week, every child in class had a cuddly new kitten to go home to. "Settle down, class," Mrs. Casey said on Friday morning. "Take out your math books. You can talk about the cats at lunch." But no sooner had Mrs. Casey begun explaining the lesson when there was a strange scratching sound at the classroom door. At first, Mrs. Casey ignored it, but then it grew louder and louder. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And then came a horrible crying sound as if someone were being tortured out in the hallway. Mrs. Casey rushed to the door and flung it open. "Oh, no," she cried. There, poised on the rafters, crouching along the wall and hanging from the coat hooks, she saw hundreds of mean, spitting, snarling cats. The cats, spying the open door, ran into the classroom, howling and roaring like wild cougars and lions. Quickly, Mrs. Casey gathered up the children and helped them climb through the first-floor windows to safety. But outside was worse. Cats were everywhere. In the trees, on the swings, and in the parking lot. Frightened people were running every which way, trying to escape from the hissing, meowing, and scratching cats. Jennifer spotted her little brother in the crowd and grabbed his hand, and together they ran toward home, fending off pouncing cats as they went. "Thank goodness you're safe," Jack cried from the driveway as he scooped the 2 children up in his arms. They made their way past long, needle-sharp claws that tore at their clothing and faces to the station wagon where Sheila was waiting. They jumped into the car, slammed the doors, and pulled out into the street. Then, thump! A huge black cat leaped menacingly onto their windshield. It had a white star in the center of its forehead, just like Hattie the cat had. It stared right at Jack and spit. But nothing could stop Jack. He stepped on the gas and plowed through the sea of white, gray, black, and orange felines, leaving hundreds of cats screaming in anger. Jack drove and drove for hours until the Murphys were far, far from home, and not one of them looked back. It took the Murphy family a few years to recover from the shock of that day. But eventually, they made a new life for themselves in a new town and in a new house. Then, one Saturday morning, when Zach was eating breakfast in the kitchen, he heard a quiet purring at the back door. When he opened the door, there at his feet was a tiny